Welcome to Genuine Life Recovery. We're here to help you and your loved ones overcome addictions and other addiction-related mental health challenges. In this show, we dive into the physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual aspects of addiction, mental health, recovery, family dynamics, codependency, and more. You can listen on your favorite app or at jodystevens.org. Genuine Life Recovery is made possible by great friends like Joshua's Heart in memory of Joshua Brent Moore, bringing hope, love, and awareness to those afflicted by addiction, online at joshsheart.org, and Jody Stevens Productions for commercial voiceover, narration, production, MC, and public speaking, online at jodystevens.org. Hey friends, welcome back to Genuine Life Recovery. I am talking today with Timothy Reigle. Timothy is the founder of Into the Wilderness Ministries, helping men transform their lives by renewing their faith, re-energizing their families, restoring their masculinity. He is author of the book Living Porn Free, 10 Steps to Recovery, Redemption, and Renewal. He's also a recovery coach, and he's helped hundreds of men overcome addiction to porn and sex, save their marriages, become better men. He is also a licensed funeral director, a chaplain, a worship leader, and a husband and father. So lots of great stuff, Timothy. Thank you so much for being willing to come on and talk about this very important, needed, but also sensitive and sometimes difficult topic.
Sure. No, thank you for having me. And it sounds like I wear a lot of hats. But
it does.
It's good though. It's good. Thank you.
Yeah, you get to be our age, although I think I've got a couple years on you, and people ask you, what do you do? You're like, where do I start,
Right, yeah, exactly.
So, you had a funeral before this. What would be the difference between like a funeral that went really well and one that like didn't go so well?
Well, I guess that's a broad spectrum. I mean, it ends with the the body getting where it needs to go. I guess that's successful. But I guess if there's no drama and things go well and things like that, because in 20 years of doing this, I've seen some things. So, no, I enjoy that. It's a very rewarding career. And being able to help people at obviously the hardest time in their life, and that's always been very rewarding for me.
Awesome. No, and that is fantastic, and would be it's a tough thing to do, but also something that's much needed, much like the work that you're doing now with porn and sex addiction, which is super important. So Timothy's going to share his story of porn addiction and deliverance, why it's such a problem in society, the damage it does, the best ways to quit, how the church is dealing with this issue or not dealing with it. So those and many other things. How long do you have, Timothy, like in recovery or sobriety, as it were?
A little over 5 years,
Nice.
5.5 years or so.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Well, you are a miracle, my friend. I always like to, I've got 18 years drug and alcohol free. My husband's like 21 years, so I always like to start these topics with just kind of hitting on addiction in general, right? Because
Sure.
It's all the same thing, right? If we're talking alcohol, if we're talking drugs, if we're talking food, if we're talking porn, you can look back and say, wow, I had a double life, right? I was hiding stuff. I was preoccupied. I was planning it. I wasn't there for my family, right? All those sorts of things. I was rationalizing. I was switching addictions, right? I mean, all those sorts of things probably relate to your story just as well as mine,
Yeah, and I've found that as well, that a lot of those things, a lot of addictions come from the same place. They just manifest themselves in different ways. And that's one of the biggest things I focus on in my coaching and my ministry, but also that helped me finally break free from it, was understanding that it is something deeper inside of us. It's not just a bad habit or something that, oh, well, if you really wanted to, you could quit. You're just not trying hard enough. That type of language, which is like telling someone who's, majorly depressed, just don't be sad. It's right. Almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Most people who are stuck in addictions don't want to be stuck in addictions.
Yeah.
And so understanding what the true causes are behind it. For porn and sex addiction, especially because there's such a taboo nature to it and things like that, it really is difficult for people to understand. A lot of these men aren't just perverts or aren't just, have this crazy sex drive or anything like that. A lot of it comes from a place of having pain in their lives that they can't deal with.
Yeah.
And one thing I say all the time is that porn addiction isn't about pleasure. Porn addiction is about pain.
Yeah.
And that's just how it manifested itself. We sexualize these emotions and learn that we could escape from either trauma or wounds or triggers in our life through porn and sex. And it wasn't until I understood that and stopped the whole, I just need to try harder, I just need to pray harder, I just need to do all that, that I found lasting recovery and lasting healing.
Yeah. Well, and, we all do things for a reason. And sometimes it's the only tool that we know. The negative effect, as they call it, or negative emotions or pain or trauma is the number one cause of addiction.
Yes.
And so you're right. It's just, it's the Band-Aid. So it's like, okay, so first stabilize the, get rid of the addiction and get some sober time. And then we dig and then we dig. And that's what recovery is, and sanctification and all those things that we go through. And you grew up in the church, and my husband grew up in the church. Now, I did not, but for him, it was always like, well, just give it to Jesus, and why can't you just stop? And while I understand that, and you and I both have seen that happen, it usually just doesn't work that way, right? Especially if there's trauma and stuff, we really gotta kind of work through this stuff,
Right, and it really is on a deeper level. And yeah, it's not something that you just pray away or just try harder or do anything like that. And now there is discipline involved.
Yeah.
There is hard work involved, and you do need to try about it. You do need to pray about it. You do need to surrender yourself to the Lord. But it needs to go deeper than that. And I think that's why so many men struggle and so many men eventually relapse, because they're just treating it like a bad habit. Yeah. And so you might get some success from that. I work with a lot of guys who, they can get a few weeks or a few months even. But they always go back to it. Because what's happening is they're pulling themselves up by the bootstraps for a while, but that only works until that pain and those emotions and those deep-seated traumas are too powerful for them to push down. And so the church, I don't think, has done a very good job over the last 20, 30 years adjusting to this. They're getting better at it now. I will say that. A lot more churches are. I've spoken in churches. They're understanding what the problem was. They didn't really keep up with the times very well. When all this, this sort of, especially porn addiction, skyrocketed with the tech boom, in the late 90s and early 2000s. It didn't really keep up with it. And the other thing is that churches just have a habit of just beating people over the head with what not to do.
Oh, yeah.
And not explaining to them the dangers of it and why it's there. Like when I was a kid, the big three were don't drink, don't smoke, don't have sex. And it was just like, don't do those. Don't do that. They're sins. You go to hell if you do those. Well, by the time you're an adventurous, a little bit of a rebellious 13-year-old boy, what do you think the three things you want to do most are?
Exactly.
And then once you try something like that, so once you get exposed to porn, you're like, this is awesome. When you're a hormonal teenage boy, so then you start questioning, well, what I was always told this was sinful and evil and all this thing, and it's actually, there's part of this that I like. This is fun and exciting and adventurous. Right. And what else is the church not telling me the truth about? And so we've thrown a baby out with the bathwater and just taught everything that sex is bad. All these things are bad and sinful when they aren't. God created sex. God created it for the marriage of a man and a woman. And it's good. And we need to teach that sex is good. It's just not good outside of a marriage.
Right.
And if you do these things, if there's promiscuity, if there's pornography abuse, if there's all these type of things, this is what happens to people and the consequences that come of that. And people like my story where it damaged not just me, but my marriage, my family, all these other things.
Yeah.
And so the church needs to do a better job explaining to that, not just beating people over the head with, hey, don't do these things.
Right. Well, and then looking at what is it that you like about it versus, we're always, like you said, everything's this negative, but sometimes looking at what it does for you and then challenging those lies and then developing some different ways to meet those needs. Like those are really important things to do too, right? That we don't talk about. And then the emotional piece of it where everything, we're all supposed to just kind of feel good. Well, but we just don't because we're in a fallen world and there's suffering. And Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. And so, you go into the church, it's like, hey, I mean, I didn't go into church till I got sober. Like I went to AA because so it's right. So you're like trying to get it all together so you can go in and like be all great. And not say, I'm depressed, I'm sad, I have anxiety, I'm an addict. We got to clean it all up, and that's the big challenge too. And it is, I think, like you said, getting better. But my thought is that you probably went to a support group, maybe away from the church first. I don't know,
Yeah, in my case, it was very much kind of what I just described. I was just a curious, adventurous, hormonal teenage boy. I didn't have any of the major kind of red flag things that a lot of the men that I work with have. There was no sexual abuse or
risk factors.
Yeah, there's none of those major red flag emotional traumas in my life.
Yeah.
But I got hooked on it right away because of what it became for me. It became a way for me to how to handle things in my life. It became my coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So it was what I went to when I was sad, when I was happy, when I was angry, when I was disappointed. And I didn't have any of those major red flags, but I still had wounds. I still had things that happened that were maybe subtle compared to some of these other things that I deal with some of the men I work with now.
Yeah.
But yet still were scarring to me emotionally, and I ran away to porn and to sex to deal with that, and that continued on through the rest of my teenage years. I got married fairly young. I was 21 when we got married, and naively thought that would solve all of it, and it, of course, it didn't. You know how that ends. But it escalated too, and that's the other danger of it is. It's not just, an innocent, horny teenage boy looking at porn. Yeah. It's what it leads to. It's a gateway drug. Porn is a gateway drug, and it escalates. And the reason it escalates is because you need more and more dopamine to get the same. Just
like any addiction.
But what's different with porn from other addictions is porn. Always has to be something. It's not just more. It has to be more and different. So, like with an alcoholic, you would just drink more. Right. And most alcoholics have their drink of choice, and they just drink more. But with porn, the guys aren't just watching the same video over and over and over again. It's always got to be something new, something different. So that's where it escalates from a 13-year-old boy that just Googles boobs to, getting into more hardcore stuff, getting into fetish stuff. And then, the chat rooms and the campsites. And now there wasn't when I was in it, but now there's the OnlyFans and the Tinders and all that sort of stuff. And then it can eventually make the jump into physical behavior, which mine did, to where I was having meetups and hookups and seeking out prostitutes and escorts and things like that. Things that I even thought were terrible at the time. Like I hated what I was doing. But that initial learning to use porn as my coping mechanism and my escape led me to that because it just continued to escalate and escalate and escalate.
Oh my gosh.
So, and I did all the right things. Like I said, I've been a part of the church my whole life. I never denied my faith or never, tried to really justify what I was doing.
Yeah.
I knew it was wrong the entire time. And I did all the right things. I went to the Bible studies. I talked to the pastor. I went to a counselor. I read all the umpteen thousand books that are written about it. None of it, they would all work for a time, but they never would completely do it. Never would completely heal. And I got caught a bunch of times, kind of BS'd my way out of it. Was good for a while. Got caught again. It was just this endless cycle for 10, 15 years.
So you had kind of a number of bottoms. You're married at this time. You're still pretty young. What was it like with the family life? Were you kind of sneaking around on the internet, like things like that? So kind of go into that, how it impacted your family, and then maybe hit on, what was really the turning point where it was like, okay, something, I mean, because most of us, we know when we know, like for me with my addiction, like something was, like I had to call a sponsor and do the dirty deal that I didn't want, I wanted God to just fix it without me having to, doing the work. Yeah. But once I did it, and then I never drank again after that, like it was different. Like there was that. But the bottom for me was just like waking up on my own vomit. And, anyway, there's just something where, and I was scared. I was gonna die. I was like, this is it. And I lost my brother to his addiction. And so something was different. And I'm sure that happened to you, where something was like, it just was. And sometimes it's not anything you would think. It's just one day you're just done. You're just done,
Well, I think God uses different ways to speak to us.
Yeah.
My rock bottom, whatever you want to call it, could have always been a lot worse than it was. My wife, I was unfaithful to my wife. I was sneaking around late at night, staying after work, doing that type of stuff, texting people on my phone, online, that sort of stuff for 10 years, into our marriage. And our kids were little at that time, so it didn't really affect them directly too much. But now looking at it, fast forward to now that my kids are teenagers, and imagine having to have that conversation with your teenage daughter that you were addicted to porn for all these years and cheated on their mother. And so it has affected my relationship with my kids, even though they didn't realize it was happening because they were little then. But so I had times where like I got caught and I was like, I'm done. I'm over with this. I don't want to do it anymore. And then eventually I went back to it. And we actually separated for about a year, my wife and I. But we ended up getting back together and continued to try and work on it getting better. And that just that cycle continued and continued. But the breaking point for me, the turnaround, wasn't any sort of rock bottom as in just everything fell apart.
Right.
I don't like the term lucky, but I was lucky in that sense that my wife stayed with me, that she was willing to forgive me and willing to work on it. The moment was I had two good friends of mine, and we were best buddies. I mean, we hung out all the time. These are the guys, you go out for a beer with, you go, watch the game with, all that sort of stuff. Our families would vacation together, and they knew about my addictions, and they would check up on me and kind of be accountability partners for me. But I kind of lied to them just like I lied to my wife and everybody else.
Yeah.
But the last time I got caught, they caught me. And they kind of exposed me to my wife, to, family, to everything. And for whatever reason, God used them to speak to me. And like you imagined at that moment, for some reason, something just a switch just flips. And for some reason, something changes in your mind or in your heart, probably more like it.
Yeah.
Where it's different this time. And I don't know why that was that way. I don't know why God used them. It in hindsight, it breaks my heart because I look back at all the pain I caused my wife, and it's like that didn't get me. Seeing how much I hurt her, that didn't get me to change. What got me to change was losing the guys I go out for a beer with, once a month.
But they're the ones that normally would be like, "Oh, this is cool." And so maybe
Right.
that's why they're the ones that were like, no, dude, this isn't cool.
Maybe.
And
Yeah.
these were the guys. And that makes you go, because, the wife, you would think, oh, well, she doesn't understand. But when it's the guys, I could see where
Yeah.
that would be really like, oh my
Sure.
gosh, like they drink beer and they're buddies and they're cool, but they don't think this is cool. That would be hard.
No.
I,
No.
I
They
could
were
see that.
They were always supportive of me
Yeah.
and tried to help me.
Yeah.
But I wasn't ready to be helped. So after that was then I really got close with a pastor, an older pastor friend of mine, and he was really, really coached me in the way that I coach guys now. And he didn't do kind of the typical pastor thing where you just pray harder, you know, or just kind of surface level counseling.
Continue to run on self-will. Yeah.
Exactly.
Pray harder.
Yeah. And pray
God
harder,
can
try
do it,
harder.
but pray harder.
Yeah, have you tried this blocking app? Have you done this? It's all the
Right.
surface level stuff, which
Yeah.
are important.
That's the initial is let's get, like I always say, stabilize the patient. You want to get, get some sober time, and then like we talked about earlier,
Exactly,
and then
yeah.
then we kind of get into the digging and the real deal.
Yeah, and he helped me realize, because I had all this time just treated it like, yeah, I'm just not trying hard enough. It's just a bad habit. I just need to force myself out of this.
Which
and
then
he
heaps
really helped
more
me.
shame on you, because now
Exactly.
you're like, well, everybody else has got their sin, which
Right.
you know what I mean? It's like admitted we were powerless over sin, that our lives had become unmanageable. That's what I always say. It's like,
Yeah, I mean,
if
that's
yours
step
is
one,
porn and
and-
mine's alcohol, and the guy they counsel you had something too. Maybe it was anger, but you see what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
but it heaps more shame on you, because then you're like, well, it's this thing, and everybody
Right.
else can get over theirs, and I can't, get mine. And anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that 12 step one of admit you're powerless, that's what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And he helped me understand then and go deeper and understand, okay, there's some emotional things that are under this. It's not that you're just running away to porn and sex just because you want to, or just because you're a pervert, or
Right.
I had a fairly healthy sexual relationship with my wife this entire time. So it wasn't like I was getting something from that I wasn't in my marriage, because it didn't have anything to do with it.
Right.
And that's something that's so hard for a lot of people to understand, and honestly a lot of wives to understand, is that these sexual addictions, porn, sexual addictions, generally have nothing to do with sex. And they have nothing to do with the wife. I mean, obviously it affects them.
Yeah.
They're affected by it. But the majority of the time, it's not that I'm not getting something from her, so I'm going to go look at porn and go cheat on her.
Right.
That wasn't it. The reason I did it was because it was how I had learned to cope with things. And so when I faced stress, when I faced anxiety, when I faced these triggers and these wounds that had happened throughout my life, that was how I dealt with it.
Right.
And so I had to face those wounds, understand where they came from, what they did to me, and then what they made me believe about myself, and kind of face those emotions and learn to process them in a healthy way.
Right.
And because if you don't do that, that's where the true recovery and healing takes place.
Right.
And
And you have to sit through to it,
Right.
to the other side of it. And once you do that, you're like, oh, well, that didn't kill me. That didn't
Right.
kill me to be depressed. It was okay.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah, you
kind
have
of
to
learn
sit
to
with that.
observe. Yeah. And then you're
And-
like, oh, okay, I didn't die. I wanted to
Yeah,
kill, like
exactly.
I did that with suicide. Like I sat through, like literally I went through a bad time, and I wanted to, I imagined getting my gun and like ending it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just observed it. I didn't act on it, and I just sat there for 2 days through
Yeah.
to the other side of it. And I realized that was God's way of saying, this is dying to self. You are dying. Right? You are dying. You're not really going to kill yourself, but you are dying to yourself. And you sat through to the other side of that depression, and you didn't die. And then you don't. And after that, I didn't have those feelings again. I didn't have it again, but we bail. And this is what we're taught to do. It's like a curve, right? And when we're 14, right, you got that bail. And then the next time you bail and you bail and you bail and
Exactly.
you bail and you never get to the other side. And it's just that way with any addiction, But anyway, I totally interrupted you, but
No, that's fine.
But
Yeah, you have to sit through that. You have to
Yeah.
face that pain
Yeah.
and not run away from it. And that's something that's so hard to do.
especially
Because
for guys.
you have to,
Yeah.
especially for guys, right? You have to sit there and force yourself to face yourself,
Yeah.
and not when
How do
for
you feel?
15. Well, yeah, but you have to face those fears, face those
Yeah.
emotions that at the first hint of we bolted and ran away from before, and ran away to whatever your addiction is. So you have to force yourself to face yourself in those ways.
Yeah.
And this is the other side of it that a lot of, I think, counselors and churches and pastors think get wrong. The first side is they just treat it like a bad habit and don't, and you just need to try harder. And that, we've talked about that. That doesn't work.
Right.
The other side is they go too quick into the clinical, too quickly. And if you're going to do that and sit through those emotions and sit through that pain and that depression and anxiety and face it and not run away from it, not bail on it, as you said, you have to have a framework set up in advance of these habits before you do that. Because
Right.
and that's what I found out with a lot of counseling things and a lot of the books and stuff that are written on it that are helpful, useful materials. But they dive headfirst into the emotional stuff, and it scares the hell out of people.
Yeah.
It's like, I got to face all this stuff, and I don't know how to, and they get overwhelmed and quit.
Oh yeah,
So-
I did that so many times when I first started in this game. It's like, oh my gosh, your mother's a narcissist. Read this book, and she's triggering you, and then you never see her again
Yeah.
until I finally learned, like, okay, just because you know something doesn't mean you have to say it. But that's hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's just like someone walking into AA. I mean, they don't even know what the 12 steps mean. It takes them 3 days to even know where they are. I
Right,
mean,
right.
yeah, you're right. It's a
So-
very slow process.
It's
initially.
a dual path to it, and I say my coaching is focusing on habits and is focusing on heart. And you need both for just the reason that I described. If it can't just be habits, but if you don't have the habits, you don't have there's no guardrail there to protect you. And if you just have the emotional stuff, you're just diving headfirst into that, and you're not prepared for it. So
Right.
I focus on getting some of these habits in place and getting that framework set first. Okay, let's stop the bleeding here first.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get to the deep-seated emotional stuff. First, we got to stop the bleeding. We're not going into surgery, with
Yeah.
it's like trying to do brain surgery, when you're still actively bleeding. Like, no, you stop the bleeding and then get
Yeah.
them to the hospital and then fix it.
Right.
And so that's where we're working on the habits and the accountability and the routines and all those different things, and get those in place. Those kind of practical, physical types of things. And then once there's some success under the belt and some victories here and some sobriety, then it's safer to dive into the deep end of the emotional stuff.
Right. And you
and-
have to have
yeah.
some coping skills and
Right.
different ways of like, okay, what's your plan? What
Yeah.
for you, I mean, you had to probably figure out what the triggers were, what
Exactly,
was it? Am
yeah.
I hungry? Am I depressed? And then, when you relapse, I mean, I always tell people, I mean, relapse is kind of normal, and when you do, it's
Exactly,
actually a really great opportunity to figure out what triggered it, and then we kind of go from there. And so how did you get so these guys found you out, exposed you, you talked to a pastor? Is that kind of how the recovery started? Then did you join a group, or how did God really kind of deliver you?
So
that
it
point?
was a lot of that one-on-one with him. That's where the real work took place. I did some group stuff, did some Bible studies
Yeah.
and group things, and those were helpful. But the heart of the work was in that one-on-one with him. And he walked me through it, loved me, encouraged me. He took the shame out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And talking about how relapses can be helpful.
Yeah.
And almost everybody relapses.
Yeah.
Almost everybody does. I know there's cases where God performs miracles and they just never go back, but
But
most people relapse.
usually they
Yeah,
wanted to, like God could
yeah,
say, hey, like I never drank again after I called the sponsor, but I can't tell
yeah.
you how many times I tried to quit on my own.
Right.
So there's that. Like most people
Yeah.
will say, yeah, but I tried 600 times on my
Yeah.
own and
So
failed,
he took that shame out of it.
Yeah.
And what happens with a lot of people, and a lot of the guys I talk to and work with now, is they get so caught up in the streaks. They get so caught up in in how many days have I gone. And if they have a relapse or a slip up, then they think all they're full of the shame again, and it starts everything all over.
Yeah.
And relapses they're a part of the recovery process, and they're not a failure of the recovery process.
Right.
And an example that I use a lot is, let's say you're driving in your car, you go 100 miles down the road, and then you blow a tire.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sucks. You're frustrated. You're mad. Whatever. But it doesn't undo the 100 miles you already traveled. You don't go back to square one just because you blew a
Right.
tire. No, you fix the tire, you get back on the road, and you avoid the potholes.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with this. We're going along. Yeah, there's going to be slip-ups. There's going to be setbacks. But they don't start us back to square one. We're still here. We pick up where we left off and keep going. And that takes that shame out of it.
Yeah.
To where, oh, I'm screwing up. I'm never going to do this. And I focus on, I'm a baseball guy, so I use baseball terminology. It's like I focus on the batting average, not the hitting streak. So
That's
if you
good.
go 2 weeks and have a relapse, well, that's not throwing away all that progress. Those are 13 days of victories, solid victories, and 1 day of, striking out, to continue the analogy.
Yeah.
That's a 920 something batting average. That's what I focus on. That takes that shame out of it. So he helped me to understand that, which helped push me forward. So working with him, helping to understand some of the emotional things that were going on, having that accountability there where I could be completely open and honest with him, and the prayer, the spiritual guidance that he gave me as well. That's what led me down the path to recovery. I learned more about it then. I joined some different groups that we had at church that did. I actually ended up kind of leading those groups after a couple of years. So my wife was a part of that process. We did a full disclosure with her where I kind of just laid everything out, and we did that in a professional way, and to allow us to start over and heal. And we actually renewed our wedding vows on our 10th anniversary after all of this.
Awesome.
And so it'll be 15 years here later this summer. So our marriage is stronger now than it ever was because I was able to do that work. And kind of one thing led to another at church. I was helping with some of these Bible studies, and I it's one of those things where even after I had some sobriety, people didn't know. I didn't talk about it. But then opportunities to talk about it kept falling on my lap.
Yeah.
I got involved. I've always been a musician, and I've always been involved with praise teams and stuff like that. And I was worship leader at church, and I had some of these younger guys that were playing on worship team and tech team and stuff like that with me. And I realized how bad it was with them. And so I kind of started mentoring them then a little bit. And then kind of I started giving my testimony. I started writing online, started doing the whole social media thing and posting stuff on there and blog articles and podcasts and stuff like that. And it's like every time I cracked open that door just a little bit, God kicked it wide open, and he's still doing that. And it was never something that I planned even after I was in recovery that I ever planned on helping other people do it. But that was the kind of the mission field that God laid on me.
Wow.
So now I've been doing this coaching for it'll almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years later this year.
So kind of what is your life like now compared to what it was? I mean, it sounds like it's just like 180.
Oh yeah, it's
You
a
know?
complete 180. I mean, my marriage is happy and healthy and exciting and thriving as it could be.
Yeah.
We're closer and healthier at 15 years than we were at any point in our marriage or dating life before then. I'm able to be a better, more engaged father to my girls. They're teenagers now. They're going through stuff now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to be that there and be an active and engaged father with them if I was still in my addiction. There's more energy, there's more drive, there's more ambition. My head's clearer. I'm not, in chains, literally and figuratively. I've gotten in better physical shape. I mean, my life is just completely turned around. I'm much closer, have a closer walk with God because I'm actually living out his plan and will and not living in sin. And having that forgiveness and that redemption through him. That's why I talk about it in my book. I talk about redemption.
Yeah.
That's something that only God can give us, and he gave us that on the cross. And we have to be willing to accept that. We have to repent and confess, repent, and turn from our ways, go and sin no more, like he says in John 8.
Yeah.
And then, we have that redemption from him, and our sins are washed, our hands are washed clean, sins are washed white as snow.
Yeah.
And I do most of my teaching from a faith-based background. I'm not somebody that believes you have to be a Christian to quit porn. I don't believe.
Yeah.
For me, my recovery and my sobriety, I didn't do that just because I'm a Christian and the Bible says it's wrong. Even that's true, but I work with a lot of guys who aren't Christian. There's a million reasons that this is devastating people's lives that have nothing to do with religion. But my relationship and my faith in Christ gave me that strength, gave me that purpose, gave me that healing and forgiveness that only he can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I want to pass that hope and that encouragement on to other men.
Yeah. Well, and I love the Bible's just a redemption story from Genesis all the way to Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And people that don't know it, they're like, well, God could never forgive me. And it's like, but he's wooing you like from page one. And then you look at just and he was an evil king, and then God wooed them back.
Mm-hmm.
And then God wooed them back. It's this great love story. It's the greatest love story ever told. It's like, of course he wants to forgive you, and it's all about drawing him to you, but we don't know that until we see it, and it's a beautiful story.
And it really is, and seeing the people and the characters in the Bible, and especially the men in the Bible, we always think of them as these great saints, and they are,
Lord.
but every one of them was broken just like we are.
Yeah. Samson.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's there's only one who was perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
And so using those examples and understanding, okay, these were real people. Yes, they had extraordinary faith, but they had extraordinary hardship as well, and they're human in their sin, and so we can learn from those things and find strength and encouragement in those things, in those lessons from the Bible that we often look over. We just think of these great, the holy saints that are on the paintings in front of the church. We don't think about how each one of those was a human who suffered and sinned just like we are, and struggled with their faith and struggled with their own types of things.
We forget that Abraham kept lying, she's not my wife.
Right.
I mean, we just like,
there's liars, there's murderers, there's
little
adulterers.
Funny things in there that you look closer and you're like, oh, yeah, wow, that was really funny.
Whatever. And I always call the Apostle Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh. We don't know exactly what that is. It could have been an addiction. It could have been a physical ailment. We don't know.
Yeah.
But the passage that I reference often is Romans 7, where Apostle Paul is talking about struggling with sin. He's like, I know what the right thing to do is, but I don't do it. He's like, I know what the wrong thing to do is, and I don't want to do it, but I still do it. And that's the exact struggle of the addict.
Yeah.
We know this is killing us. We know it's destroying our lives, our families, our relationships, careers. It's destroying us. We know it's wrong. We know we have to stop. We just can't. On our own. And that's what he says. We can't. Because we were dead to sin, and it's the sin that lives within us, and only through the grace and forgiveness of Jesus Christ gives us the victory. And that's what gives us the freedom. We'll never find freedom on our own. It's through that that healing and that redemption through him.
Yeah, and then of course the Holy Spirit, over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
That's where when it says, "I'm powerless over my addiction. I need a power greater than myself, which is the Holy Spirit. Otherwise, I'm going to keep gratifying the flesh because that's
Exactly.
what I was born to do." And I've struggled with this for so long because for me it would go, I would probably never take another drink, but then the food issue comes up, or it's always
Mm-hmm.
something.
Yeah.
And finally, I'm like, how do I do this? How do I walk by the Spirit? And finally, it came to me. It was like, you got to do. You obey first. Like you
Mm-hmm.
make a decision, you walk in it, and then those things will begin. But
Exactly.
it's you have to kind of make that decision. And so it's
Sure.
but it's a process. Well, talk to me just about porn in general in the world today. Why is it so bad? Why are so many women too are addicted to it?
Mm-hmm.
You think it's shameful for the guys? The women, we don't even want to talk about alcoholism and porn. But
Yeah.
why is it so bad, and what damage does it do, and why is it so hard to quit? That's kind of like four questions, but
Yeah. Well, we're such a hypersexualized culture in
yeah,
general,
oh yeah,
and so sex is everywhere, and
yeah,
it's that talking about that of the flesh, and so it's almost become that it's a good thing for you to indulge in the desires of your flesh, and we want that instant gratification
yeah,
for everything, whether it's from coffee to porn and sex. We want everything instant, and that's pervading into our lives that we can't handle anything unless we want those rewards and that satisfaction. We want to feel good right now.
yeah.
So instead of sitting and processing through those emotions, we want to sit and we just want to escape and feel good. And that's where all the hypersexualization has come in, the hookup culture has come in. All these things that have gained traction over the years that promise fun, promise satisfaction,
Right.
promise you all these things, but really they leave you empty and broken. And so that's one of the reasons people have become so much, they seek out all these addictions and type of things. They don't go into them thinking they're going to be addicted. They go into them thinking, oh, I'm just going to blow off some steam here. And then it gets you
Right.
trapped. And the sexual culture is just everywhere. And we started putting these things in the hands, smartphones in the hands of 9, 10-year-olds,
Oh gosh,
and
yeah.
expect them not to look at hardcore porn. Like it's going to happen. And it's just everywhere. And it's affecting men especially, but yes, it's affecting women as well. It's destroying marriages. It's people are losing careers over it.
Yeah.
It's causing that shame cycle, and it's causing more and more depression and anxiety. I've worked with men on the verge of suicide because they're like, I can't stop this, and I'm spending hours of day doing this, and I hate myself. My life's falling apart. My wife's left me. My kids are gone, and all because I can't stop jerking off
Yeah.
to a computer screen. The physical problems too. You're seeing young men in the highlight of their life. It's not the right term, but in the prime of their life, I guess,
Yeah.
having erectile dysfunction problems. And that's all related to porn-induced erectile dysfunction. Because where they get to the point where they watch so much porn that even real sex with a real woman isn't enough for them to be aroused. And so they'd almost rather, and a lot of guys have said this, they'd rather just watch porn and masturbate than go and have sex with their wife or their girlfriend or whatever.
And even just
And
because I even related to that to some
yeah,
degree because I was sexualized early and I was exposed to porn, and after just
mm-hmm,
seeing a little bit of it, it never went away. It's still
yeah,
in my head,
yeah,
and so I can't even imagine that repeated year after year after year.
yeah.
It's just, I mean, do you ever get rid of that? Like, is there a way to get rid of that in your head?
Well,
How do
I
you?
mean, kind of once you see something, you've seen it. But I mean, you get to the
Right. I
point where
mean,
it doesn't affect you anymore. And you get to the point where your brain doesn't just jump to it. Because your brain literally does create shortcuts, from a medical scientific aspect.
Oh yeah, the whole reward pathway, the dopamine.
Your reward dopamine reward system gets screwed up, and it creates
Yep.
those shortcuts to where something triggers you, and you boom, you go right to the
Yeah.
addiction, to the porn.
Yeah.
That can be changed, but that doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
That can take
Right.
years for your brain to rewire itself.
Rewire. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and that's where I'm at now. I'm at the point where, there's still images in my head, and you still see something on TV or something pops up online or something, and I can see that now, and it doesn't trigger that instant reaction that it used to, because I went through that healing process and that recovery process, and that honestly, there's withdrawals there too.
Yeah.
But and was able to overcome that, and my brain over time went through that, and now I don't have that issue. Same thing with the ED. Men who have long enough time away from the porn and things, eventually their brain starts healing itself, and then they don't struggle with that anymore. But you see it everywhere. Like, one thing I like to point out to people is look at the advertisements for ED drugs. So, Hims is a big one now, and I think Roman, there's a couple of them now. So many guys struggle with that because of porn.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see
15 years ago when those drugs came out, they were all older, silver foxes in their 60s and 70s, and that's who they were marketing the drugs to, because that happens when you get older. Now, the men in these commercials are like 20, 30-year-old guys. Who should be in the height of their virility in life.
Yeah.
But they struggle with getting an erection to have sex with their wife because they're watching so much porn. And nobody wants to discuss that. Why is a 25-year-old who should have zero problems with sexual performance having all these problems?
Wow.
It's because probably 70% of 25-year-olds watch porn all the time.
Yeah.
And that's something nobody's talking about, but yet you see it. You see them marketing it to these people, and they should have no problem with that. But it's the unspoken thing is like all these guys are watching porn.
And that makes so much sense. And do you think that's why it's hard to quit? See, like with addiction, we go to you're going to put you in a detox center, right? Or like I did my practicum at an opiate treatment center. We're going to do methadone. We're going to titrate you down. You do these things, but with porn, we don't have something like, maybe we do, but to my knowledge, we don't. You gotta starve it, right? You gotta starve it.
You
right?
really do. Yeah, there's no real weaning off type of thing. Yeah, there's no methadone. There's no anything like that.
Right.
And it's something that once you have those images in your head, it's always there. You always have it. It's not like you have to go and meet your dealer, or you have to go to the liquor store or whatever to get your fix. It's all right there. And so a lot of guys will even get to the point where they stop watching porn and they just masturbate and can't stop that because they're addicted to the dopamine release at orgasm. That's what they're really addicted to. Mm-hmm. And so it's always there, and it's so easily hidden. If someone's a severe drug addict or a severe alcoholic, that's not something you can hide from other people.
Yeah.
Some people do hide it very well. There's a lot of high function.
I was pretty good at it.
Yeah. But eventually, at some point, with a lot of those things, there's going to be physical effects too.
Yeah.
There's going to be changes in the body, changes in skin tone and flesh color and stuff like that. There's going to be physical changes with that. With porn, there isn't any of that.
No.
It can be completely 100% hidden. And you hear that. You hear about these guys who are famous athletes or pastors or whatever, and all of a sudden they get exposed, and they were doing this for 30 years and nobody knew about it.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to hide it. And the world just keeps pushing it that there's nothing wrong with it. So, it's only guys like me and a few other places that are saying this is wrong, and we got to fix this because it's destroying you. When the rest of the society is saying it's good, and they're telling young boys it's good to masturbate and watch porn because it reduces aggression and it does all these.
Oh, good Lord.
Well,
now we're even beyond that. Now it's like, go be a girl if you.
Exactly.
We're so beyond. Like
Right.
we're just.
So,
that's a whole nother.
Well, yeah, that's a whole
nother
nother Pandora's box. But yeah. So the society is telling us that this is all good and healthy, and we should be pursuing this. when deep down it's destroying things.
So for the guy that's listening, or even the gal, like how do we quit? What's the first step, right? I mean, we want to get some help. How do we quit?
The first step is to ask for help.
Yeah.
The first step is to admit you need help. Like we talked about earlier, first step is to admit you're powerless over it.
Yep.
That's honestly the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And the guys that I've worked with, they're like, the hardest part of this was me shooting you a DM on Twitter and being like, hey, I need help. But that's the hardest part is taking that first step, reaching out. Hey, going to talk to somebody and be like, hey, I need help. I can't do this on my own. And addiction isn't something, recovery isn't a solo project.
Yeah.
In any addiction, you need accountability, you need help, you need support, guidance, encouragement. You need someone who's going to, maybe give you a, kick in the ass when you need it from time to time. And so reaching out for help is the first step. Getting that help. Then going through establishing some of this framework to stop that bleeding, like I was talking about earlier. Okay, it's a problem. You ask for help. Okay, let's stop the bleeding. Let's do the whole Hippocratic thing. Do no more harm. No more. Do no harm. Don't make it worse here.
Right.
Let's analyze the problem. Figure out what's going on. Get some habits and routines and things like that in place as a framework. And then we'll dive into the deeper stuff, figure out what's really going on. We have to figure out that why, and find that true emotional healing, because addiction isn't something you quit. It's something you heal from.
Yeah.
And so discovering that, learning to process what the true issues are. Don't just treat the symptoms, treat the disease.
Yeah.
Deal with what the true emotional problems are. Learn to deal with those in a healthy way, and that's how you find lasting healing and recovery.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this too, it doesn't just take care of itself. Any type of addiction is very progressive. It tends to get worse. So if you're listening to it, like, now's the time, right? I mean, this is for you, because you're not going to magically wake up one day and it's going to go away. Right. It's possible, it's happened, but generally not. Well, Timothy, this has been great. Finally, what I did want to talk briefly about was just the church in general. We talked about how the church is getting better in addressing these issues. What do they need to do yet still to address pornography in our culture?
Well,
and
I think
in people's
the church
lives?
There's two things I think the church needs to do. One, I think, is bring the porn topic out of the taboo and out of the shadows. If there's a obviously there's confidentiality issues and stuff like that, but it needs to be, hey, this is a big issue. Like in a church, in any given church, there are probably far more people addicted to porn than are dealing with drug addiction or alcohol addiction or, gambling or whatever. Just the statistics are there's more people, struggling with that and the church focuses on a lot of other things that, aren't as big of a deal. And I said, just bring it out of the shadows and start talking about it.
Yeah.
The other thing that churches need to do is have much stronger men's support. Churches aren't preaching to men. Their churches are filled with women, they're not filled with men. And it's great the women are there, but there's nothing there for the men. Churches have become very feminized, very weak. There's a lack of strength in the church.
It's funny because the church is like a corporation, and I did, radio as a DJ for 30 years, still am, and it was always like our target was the women 25 to 54 because they're the ones with the purse strings and they're the ones that make the financial decisions. And you look at the church and it's like they're doing the same thing. Like oh, well, the women make decisions, so we build all our programming around them because they're the ones with the money. Come on now, tell me it's not about that.
Exactly. Unfortunately,
anyway,
it
sorry,
is.
like
it is,
a whole nother topic, but
you're exactly right. The the church needs to step up and be stronger, and give men the example, and men need to step up and be the example and take that mantle of leadership which God
You're
called
right,
them to
and
be.
It's two ways. We can't just blame the church, but
right. So yes, the church needs to help men, and men need to step up and take those leadership roles.
Yes,
and take that responsibility on them. We need more strength. We need more boldness and courage. Be strong and courageous. God told Joshua.
Yes.
And if there isn't that, it's a lot of weakness, and just a lack of preaching biblical truth in order to satisfy cultural narratives.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we're willing to, we won't worry about that so much because people, don't talk about those things. People don't want to come and hear about these tough topics like porn and sex and sin and all that sort of stuff. Just go in there and preach go preach some Dr. Phil sermon and make everybody feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
That's not the Bible. That's not Scripture. That's not the gospel. So we need to be preaching the truth of the word, even the hard stuff, especially the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And someone's got to have the strength and courage to preach that, even if it's unpopular in 2023.
Yeah.
And so,
amen.
And the reverse side of that is because there isn't that boldness and that courageousness and that strength, there's nothing that's attracting men to go there and be a part of it. For why do men want to go to church to hear some self-help sermon, to sing songs that sound like Jesus is my boyfriend songs, to and there's just all women around and it's all a touchy-feely message. What guy, what red-blooded American guy wants to go and sit through that? They don't. And that's why they aren't going. So I think we need that strong male headship that the Bible says there needs to be in the church and in families.
Yeah.
And that's going to make difference, obviously, in the porn and sexual area as well. But it's going to have effect and throughout the rest of the church and community too.
So many nuggets of truth there. I got to have you back on and talk about the stuff going on in the church for a whole nother episode.
Sure, be glad to.
That'd be fun. Because we could talk about that for another hour. Because even I see some of it, I was with Christian music station, The Fish, out of, Sacramento. And so we just did a lot of church ministry and stuff. And there were just a lot of beautiful things and wonderful things. I love the church, of course. But there was a lot of just stuff that you talked about that, was creeping and that I was able to see, even being a woman and, all that stuff. So let's do that for sure. I would love that.
Sure, be glad to.
I'll follow up on that, and you can send me some kind of topic ideas or things. Because are you a pastor as well, or
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I have I play on a worship team and lead worship at the church.
Oh, wait, we can talk about that too.
Yeah, and
narcissism in the church.
Yeah, right.
I'm serious. That's a hot topic.
Yeah,
everybody's talking about narcissism.
Yeah, I'm kind of I'm a tattooed punk rock kid that ended up playing worship music, but So no, and I do that. I also do. I have a chaplain's license to where I do kind of some ministry. I do that mostly through my main job as a funeral director and a mortician. I do a lot of ministry to families through that and lead a lot of funerals and kind of hospice cares and to that type of thing that I do kind of mostly through my day job. So no, I'm not ordained. My father was a pastor for 50 years. I grew up in the church.
Oh Lord, so you're a PK. So yeah,
so I'm a PK on top of it.
I could have you and then my husband who grew up in the church where, I would come home completely with my heart ripped open and scarred and he'd say something like, "Oh, I'm glad to know the Pentecostals haven't changed," or something like that. And I would be like, "What? Like what?"
Yeah.
Nothing against Pentecost. I don't mean it like that. I don't even know if that was what it was, but and I just, I had to learn later in life that people in church were human. I was used to it outside of the church. Like I was fine when there were family wounds or things like that. But once I went in the church as an older person, it was like, what? They're not,
My
so
wife dealt
that's
with
a
the
hard
same
lesson.
thing because she never saw
Yeah.
the politics behind the scenes that
Oh.
pastors and their families deal with, and all the maneuvering and conniving and manipulation and politics and stuff like that goes on. Because it shouldn't, but we're human, and
I know.
our nature is to sin, and we live in a fallen world, and that doesn't mean the church is bad. That just means that people are sinners that are in the church, and that's how it's always been. It's how it's always going to be until the Lord comes again.
Yeah.
So,
Don't let people ruin your relationship with God. That's what I had to
Right.
learn.
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
Timothy, thanks for hanging out. Tell people how they can get in touch with you. We talked about getting help. If you're a guy
Sure.
struggling with porn addiction, reach out to Timothy because this is what he does. He's here to help you. So give us all your information and where we can find you.
Sure. Thank you. Best way to find me is usually through social media. Twitter and Instagram are kind of my main ones. I'm just my name, at Timothy Reigle. My website's timothyreigle.com. You can message me through there and find out more information there. Feel free to shoot me an email, shoot me a DM on social media. Just be like,
Okay.
hey man, I need help, and we'll go from there.
Okay, and how do you spell your last name?
Reigle.
Okay, cool. Okay, Timothy Reigle. Timothy, thank you so much for joining us on Genuine Life Recovery.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, friends, for listening to Genuine Life Recovery, playing on your favorite app or on my website at jodystevens.org. It's JODIESTEVENS, jodystevens.org. There you can check out my podcast, blog, recovery coaching info, speaking, and more. Check it out.